My husband died keeping a secret for so many years. I didn't understand how difficult a secret could be until I opened the country house. I wanted to sell it, but what I saw when I arrived made me stop. I went there with a folder to sign the deed. I convinced myself I was being practical. One widow, two houses, a son who says, "Mom, you can't keep up with this anymore." The paint on the porch was peeling. The key stuck, then gave in. It smelled of dust, apples, and my husband's aftershave. Faint, like a memory you could almost touch. I set my bag on the bench and said in the silence, "Okay, let's make this simple." Instead, I found the kitchen light on, the table empty, and in the center, like a lifeguard's whistle, a single envelope, my name, written in his careful handwriting. I sat down before opening it. The letter was short. He thanked me for keeping our family safe from the elements. And then, "If you're reading this, others will be reading you." In the lower left corner, he'd drawn a tiny clock, the same one he'd drawn while waiting for a reply. Underneath it, "Look at the clock. We don't keep a clock in the kitchen, we have 3. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, like it, and let us know in the comments what time it is where you are listening to this story. A brass sunbeam over the pantry, a cheap plastic one by the back door, and a thick ceramic rooster over the stove. I lifted the sunbeam first. Nothing. Then the plastic one. Just batteries. The rooster looked at me with that idiotic cheerfulness I'd never liked. I took it off the hook and felt a heaviness that wasn't there. Inside, behind my face, someone had taped a flash drive and a folded, notarized piece of paper with a blue seal. I felt a simultaneous chill and heat. It was a document notarized 2 years ago, transferring the country house into my name, with wording that completely disallowed any claims by heirs, assigns, or agents acting under color of convenience. My husband's signature was firm. I recognized the notary from the bank. My phone vibrated. My son, Daniel. "Mom, are you there yet? Good. Don't let anyone in. Buyers can move in. And also, I spoke to Brookside. They have a room opening next week, but we better hurry." "Brookside," I said, looking at the rooster in my lap. "How efficient. That will take the pressure off you. We'll get on with the sale. Vanessa's already spoken to the realtor. Great guy. Works fast." "Daniel," I asked as gently as I could, "how could my own son be so eager to cut me out of his life?" A moment, and the voice he uses to talk to his clients, soft, reasonable. "This is what Dad wanted. He told me to keep an eye on you." "Really?" I shoved the flash drive into my purse. "Did he tell you what time it was?" "What?" he asked. "Never mind." I hung up before the sweetness in my voice wavered. I stood up, locked the back door, and listened. Houses make sounds when they're empty. This one was breathing. The living room held the same low couch and the same lamp with the crooked shade, but the rug was rolled, and under it a section of floorboards had been lifted and set back with the wrong nails. My husband wasn't sloppy. I pried, lifted, and found a metal cash box without a lock. Inside, a lined notebook, 3 bank cards, a key stamped 142, and a micro recorder the size of a matchbox. I pressed play. Vanessa's voice filled the room, clear, amused, unmistakable. "She will sign anything if we call it safety. We say Brookside and she'll picture bingo and surrender." "Daniel, lower. We need the proceeds." "You said the investor wants in before summer Vanessa again. He wants the land, not the house. He'll bulldoze and subdivide. We fold her into a care plan and smile for the neighbors." The recorder clicked, then another voice, my husband's, thinned by illness but sharp as a blade. "I told you both to leave. You come near her again, I'll—" "Vanessa, you can't even walk to the mailbox." "Sit down, old man." The sound of a cough, my heart crawled into my throat. I stopped the recorder and held it like a bird too frightened to save itself. He had left me the shape of their betrayal in his own house, in our house, like a map drawn on the back of a drawer. The evidence was here, the plan too. He knew them better than I let myself know. I carried the cash box to the window and looked out at the birches my husband planted the year Daniel turned 8, when he still believed a tree could anchor a boy. The lake beyond held the sky as if it were a promise. The realtor would come with his brochures and his compliments. Daniel would arrive with papers thick as a Sunday roast and say, "Initial here and sign there." Vanessa would sit with her legs crossed and pass me a pen with a smile that had never quite reached her eyes. Not anymore. I put the box back in its cavity and relayed the boards. I took the deed in the drive. I turned off the kitchen light, then turned it on again because it felt right to leave a lighthouse burning. As I locked the door, a car slowed on the road. It paused, then eased on. The house was watching. So was I. What do we do when the people we love mistake us for furniture? We stand up, we move. I drove back to the city with the deed pressed flat beneath my palm on the passenger seat, as if it might try to escape. Traffic blurred headlights into white ropes. I counted them to keep my hands steady. Grief had been a dull, constant tide for 2 weeks. Now it lifted and left a crust of resolve behind. That surprised me. Resolve had a taste, iron and mint, and a sound like the inside of a seashell. I wasn't done loving my husband just because he had stopped breathing. Love could still move pieces on the board. At home, I locked the door, left the lights off, and put the thumb drive into my old laptop. He had labeled the only folder with my name. Inside, files named like a calendar, dates, initials, short words, each one a thread. I opened the most recent, a recording taken in our kitchen 3 months earlier. Daniel's voice came first, impatient, a rhythm he learned in sales. "That place is sitting empty. Taxes alone are stupid. We can roll the proceeds into something that actually yields." My husband, quiet. "It yields birches and a garden that grows tomatoes for your mother. It yields a place to sit when you have nowhere else to be." Vanessa, "We don't need poetry. We need practical. Your wife is falling apart. She doesn't drive out there anymore. Let us help." My husband coughed, a sharp little bark. "You don't help by taking. You help by standing where you said you'd stand." Chairs scraped. A glass touched the counter. Then a sentence that crawled up my spine and didn't come back down. "Vanessa, the investor's crew can start in March. He'll take the whole parcel. We get him to commit, we get our referral, and she gets a nice little room at Brookside with all the puzzles she can play." The file ended. The next one, opened on its own, video this time, a camera angle I didn't recognize, high with a slight fisheye. The birdhouse outside the kitchen window. He had been recording the back door. Daniel and Vanessa standing on the porch, their faces too close. Vanessa smoking a cigarette she pretended not to smoke. "Don't look at me like that," she said. "You promised you'd handle her. If you can't, I'll call the conservator myself and say she's wandering." "She's not," Daniel said. "It doesn't matter," Vanessa answered, exhaling a fast cloud. "Words are what matter. Safety. Concern. I can cry. You've seen me?" I froze the frame on her mouth in that shape. I remembered the day she practiced the word mom in the mirror before meeting me for the first time. She wanted to get it right, she'd said. She had. She'd put the stress on the end. There was a folder labeled letters. Inside, scans of notes in my husband's unassuming print, grocery lists, and under them, instructions, which attorney to call if something strange happened with the accounts. The bank manager who owed him a favor from a fundraiser in 2003, the name of a detective he had fished with once, who had a soft spot for women who appear to be alone, and on the last page, written larger than his normal hand, "Trust yourself. Trust Ruth." Ruth lived across from the country house. She baked pies for funerals and filmed every unusual vehicle that slowed on our road as if life were a parade that needed witnesses. I had waved to her that afternoon without understanding she was part of the plan. I closed the laptop and went to bed with my heart still standing. Sleep came in pieces. My husband's voice threaded through, steadying, telling me to check the clock, the floorboards, the way a man might tell a child to watch both ways. At 4 a.m, I woke with the feeling you get when a storm changes direction. I made coffee, took my notebook from the drawer, and started a list. My lists never looked like his tidy columns. Mine circled and connected and left spaces for what I didn't know yet. I wrote names, I wrote times. I wrote a question. What do I want? Not revenge as a word, heavy and dramatic. Not a public scene. Justice, yes, but also something more specific. I wanted my son to look at me and see his mother again, not an obstacle between himself and a payday. I wanted the truth laid out like clean laundry. By 8, I was back on the road to the country house. Frost still clung to the grass in the shaded bend just before our mailbox. Ruth's curtains were open. She stepped onto her porch in her slippers, lifting her phone before I had parked. "Knew you'd come," she said without preamble. "You look like you haven't slept." "We can nap when we get old," I answered. It made her smile the way I meant it to. I told her what I had found and what I suspected, and the way my husband had drawn a clock to push me toward the rooster. She listened with her eyes on my face. Not the drama of it, but the small things, that my hands trembled when I said Vanessa's name, that I looked toward the lake every time I mentioned my husband. When I finished, she held up her phone. "I have them on video 2 times," she said. "A truck came in the back way the day after the funeral. Only for an hour. People carried out boxes. I zoomed in, bless my nosiness. You can see labels, linens, and old photos. I called Daniel, asked if he had a key. He said yes. He said you were in favor. I didn't believe him, so I filmed the back of the truck and the license plate." "Can I have a copy?" "You can have the original," she said. "I don't keep much. I keep what matters." This matters. Inside the house, the air had the damp smell it gets when no one moves it around with breathing and talking. I opened windows. I put on water for tea. I sat at the kitchen table with the deed in its plastic sleeve and the recorder next to it. The rooster clock grinned down at me, stupid and faithful. When my phone rang, I let it buzz through to voicemail. Then it buzzed again. Vanessa's name, then the realtor, whose contact I had never asked for. Then my son. I answered on the 4th ring. "Mom, good," Daniel said. "You're there." "Don't leave. Mark is stopping by to look around. He's got a 10 a.m. slot." "Mark who?" "Mark the realtor," he answered, too quickly. "I told you about him." "You told me about Brookside," I said. "Not Mark." Silence. "Can we not do this?" he asked. "We're trying to help." "Come," I said. 10 a.m. I have coffee. Ruth sat with me until 9:55 and then went home, her camera already on, her blinds tilted just enough. I set the recorder so it faced the kitchen with its little black eye. I tucked a second device, the one from the cash box, into the flowers on the windowsill. If they wanted a performance, I would give them one and keep a copy. The knock came on time. Vanessa arrived dressed in real estate beige. Daniel trailed her, jacket unzipped, eyes skating past me to the walls as if looking for weak points. Mark was the third, a man with a warm voice and teeth too white for winter. He stepped forward with a practiced hand. "Mrs. Calloway, my condolences," he said. "What a lovely property." "So many possibilities, I said. "That's a word that can mean anything." He laughed lightly, a sound that didn't belong to any particular joke. "We're here to reduce stress," he said, placing his leather folder on the table without being asked. "We can offer above asking because the buyer values the land itself. He's prepared to move quickly. You'll be free to make the choices you want." Vanessa slipped her hand over his folder like a sleeve. "Isn't that wonderful?" she said. "Freedom." "Before we discuss freedom," I said, "let's discuss ownership." I slid the plastic sleeve across the table. The blue notary seal caught the light like a wink. Mark's eyebrows lifted. Daniel leaned in and then leaned back as if the paper had stung him. "That's new," he said. "It's 2 years old," I answered. "Recorded and stamped." "Your father and I believed in planning." Vanessa smiled without lowering her gaze. "This doesn't change our concern," she said. "You need care, and care costs money." "Watch your words," I said. "They are being recorded." Her chin tipped. "You can't record us without—" "This is my kitchen," I said, "and I just told you." Mark put both palms up, an international gesture for Let's not fight in front of the client. He studied the deed, his real smile slipping a fraction. He wasn't the architect of this, he was a subcontractor who had turned around to find the blueprint different. This means we will need to adjust the process, he said. Of course. These things happen. They don't, I said. Not to me. Not like this, Daniel sat, elbows on his knees. For a moment, the boy peeked out from behind the man, the boy who admitted to a broken window, who asked if we could eat pancakes for dinner and sleep in the living room to pretend we were camping. I wanted to hand him a plate and a fork. Instead, I handed him a truth. Your father knew, I said. He knew you would try to make this house into money. He knew she would help you. He knew the investor's name. He recorded your conversations, Daniel. He did it because he didn't want to make me choose between loving you and protecting myself. He made the choice for me. He lifted his head slowly, as if he were remembering instructions from a manual he hadn't read in a while. You don't get to say what Dad knew, he answered, quiet. You weren't there when he asked me to help. I knew my revenge was near. Tomorrow I will make everyone pay for everything. He asked you to be a son, I said, not a broker. Vanessa exhaled through her nose and leaned back. We'll come back with our attorney, she said to Mark, as if I weren't at the table. This isn't productive. I stood. Bring anyone you like, I said. In the meantime, don't set foot on this property without my invitation. Don't cut across the back lot. Don't tell strangers to enter my kitchen. If you do, I will call the deputy in town, and he will come. He is bored and eager. Daniel flinched at that. Bored lawmen are unpredictable. When they left, the house relaxed. I heard it, the sigh behind the walls, the way a place settles when it remembers who it belongs to. I wasn't fool enough to think it was done. Vanessa didn't retreat. She regrouped. I cleaned the cups they had not used and looked at the second hand on the rooster. It ticked without hurry. I wasn't in a hurry either. Patience is most dangerous when it belongs to someone underestimated. I called the bank manager my husband had written down. She remembered his names for plants and his habit of counting his deposits twice. I can't discuss accounts, she said, but I can tell you what to ask for. Thank you, I said, and I'm sorry he isn't the one calling. She exhaled a small human sound. He was kind to my mother when she sprained her wrist in the lobby. He carried her bag to the car. Ask for a review of any recent changes to credit lines linked to your addresses. Ask for a hold on any power of attorney that hasn't been verified in person in the last 30 days. Ask for fraud protection on your card. Ask me to repeat this back and you'll have it on record. I did. She did. I hung up and wrote it down. And then I called the attorney my husband had noted, a woman who answered her own phone and said her name like a destination, not a question. I explained without embellishment. She interrupted once, not to correct me, but to say, I hear you. I don't want a war, I said. I want a fence. I want them to see it and stop. Sometimes, she answered, people only see fences after they've run into them. Are you willing to let them run? Yes, I said, surprised by how steady the word felt. And I'd like the fence to be electrified. She laughed, and I liked her. Then I'll draft a letter, she said. Cease and desist. No more entry to your property without permission. No more attempts to transfer or encumber assets. And we'll file for a temporary restraining order if they push again. Keep your recordings. Keep your neighbor close. Document everything. Bring me copies of that deed and the thumb drive on a separate device. Don't turn over anything original. I know, I said, and she paused, hearing what I hadn't said, that I have learned this the hard way in small ways all my life. Don't hand your only proof to the person asking most gently. After I hung up, I took a walk to the lake. The path was leaf-littered, the birches bare as bone. I put my hand on one and felt the cold press into my skin. How do we forgive our children for being themselves when those selves harm us? Is forgiveness a door we open for them or a window we open for ourselves? The lake didn't answer. Water keeps its counsel. I tossed a stone and listened to the rings spread until they didn't. When I turned back toward the house, a silver SUV sat at the end of the drive. Not Vanessa's, not Daniel's. A man leaned against it, careful as someone who knows he's being watched. "You're trespassing," I called. He straightened and lifted both hands, smiling like a man in a toothpaste ad. "I'm just admiring the view," he said. "This is a special property." "Then admire from the road," I answered. He took a step closer. "We can make this easy." "People who say that rarely do," I said. "Name." "Call me Cole," he said, as if names were hats he could swap. "I represent interested parties." "I represent myself," I said. "And you're leaving." He read my face and decided not to test it. "You should talk to your son," he said, easing back toward his SUV. "He's in deeper than you think. Some of us are trying to pull him out. Others aren't so friendly. I didn't like the layers in that. I didn't like the way he drove away either. Slow, to leave space for me to call after him. I didn't. I memorized his license plate and called Ruth. "That one was here last week," she said. "He doesn't blink like a normal person." That night, the second hook found me. It didn't knock. It texted. "Unknown number. Check the blue bin behind the tool shed. Do it now. Don't call anyone." I stood in the kitchen with the phone in my hand and let the adrenaline do what it always does, fill the room with shadows that look like men. I breathed. I looked at the clock. If this was a trap, it was a stupid one. If it was a test, it was a mean one. I put on my jacket and my husband's old boots and went out into the cold. The blue bin held garden stakes and 3 cracked terracotta pots. Under them, wrapped in plastic like a bad idea, lay a manila envelope sealed with cheap tape. I carried it inside and laid it on the table like a patient. The recorder ticked softly. I sliced the tape. Inside, photocopies, bank statements from an account I hadn't known existed, transfers in amounts that made my breath short. Not millions. We're not that family, but enough to hurt, to scramble, to make bad decisions look reasonable. And at the bottom, a contract. The investor's letterhead, an agreement signed by Daniel and Vanessa to deliver clear title to the country property in exchange for a consulting fee dispersed upon demolition. The date was 2 days after my husband's funeral. I read it twice. My son had signed his name with a flourish he reserves for strangers. My daughter-in-law had signed with her last name underlined, as if trying to deepen the groove. The witness line was empty. The notary block was blank. They had been in a hurry. My phone buzzed again. Unknown. If you want to keep him out of handcuffs, do not show this to the police first. There is another way. Unknown. Tomorrow. Noon. Bench by the old bait shop. Come alone. I know what every woman my age is taught. Don't meet unknowns alone anywhere. Bring a friend. Call a cop. Tell a neighbor. But my life had already been rearranged by people who knew my rules. Sometimes you have to take a different road to arrive at a safer house. I slept with the envelope under my pillow like a child and woke before the sun. The bait shop had closed 10 years ago. The bench still faced the lake as if it expected fishermen to return. A woman sat at one end with a knitted hat pulled low and a scarf that had seen better winters. She wasn't young, she wasn't old, she looked like someone I might have helped choose a blouse for her brother's wedding, someone you forget until you don't. "You're fearless or foolish," she said, not turning. "Both," I said. "Who are you?" "Someone who made a mistake with a man who makes his living off other people's mistakes." She glanced at me. "Cole called you, didn't he?" "That's not his name today. The investor?" "His face, his money. He changes names like socks." "I called him Christopher when I knew him. He liked that. He doesn't like to lose. You signed something," I said. She lifted an eyebrow. "Oh, I didn't sign. I just introduced. That was enough to bring me into the mess. Your daughter-in-law is ambitious. Your son is weak. That combination makes men like Christopher feel like kings. What do you want?" "To leave this town without a shadow," she said, "and to have him trip over something sharp on his way out. I put the envelope in your bin because you looked like a woman who doesn't flinch." "Who are you to him?" I asked. She hesitated, and I saw the wound open and close behind her eyes. "The last woman who thought she could change him." "People are not recipes," I said. "They don't become something else if you add more sugar." She smiled without pleasure. Your husband recorded things, she said. Good. Keep those safe. But there's one more thing you need. Christopher keeps a second phone. He uses it only for deals that could bite. It's in a lockbox in his truck. Black case, 4 digits. His code is the date his father left, 0714. He thinks no one knows. When men brag, they always forget who's listening. You want me to break into his truck? I want you to look, she said. Then hold it up where the light can find it. How do you know I'm not going to the police first? Because you're a mother, she answered simply, and because I watched you in the grocery store last month talking to a cashier like she was more than her name tag. You are careful, and you are not cruel. That is the most dangerous kind of woman. She stood. Noon tomorrow, he's having coffee at the diner. He sits by the window because he likes to be seen. He leaves his keys on the table because he likes to control his losses. He will go to the bathroom at 12:22. 2 minutes. That's your window? How could I ever thank you, I asked. Use it, she said. Then leave town for a day. I don't know if the plan was reckless or brave. I only know that when the clock above the diner read 12:21 the next day, my heart beat so loud it felt like a tap on the pane. Christopher, Cole, sat where she said he would. Vanessa slipped into the booth across from him in a coat too thin for the weather. I watched through the window with my scarf high on my nose and my eyes low. At 12:22, he stood, patted his pockets, tossed his napkin onto the plate, and walked toward the back. The keys lay on the edge of the table. Vanessa checked her lipstick and her phone. I counted to 5, opened the diner door, and stepped inside. The warmth hit my face and made my eyes water. I pretended to look for someone, then pretended to change my mind, then slipped the keys into my pocket like a coin I meant to return. His truck was where he had left it. The lockbox slid out from beneath the seat with a little squeak. I whispered, 714, and the lid lifted as if relieved to let go. Inside, a phone, black and slim and mean. I took photos with my own phone first. Screens, call logs, messages loaded with numbers and dates. Then I took the SIM and slid it into a small paper envelope I had bought just for this. I put everything back exactly as it had been, including the thin layer of dust my fingertip had disturbed. I returned the keys to the edge of the table while Vanessa laughed at something I didn't hear. My hands didn't shake until I reached the sidewalk. Back at the house, I lined up my trophies. I'm not an investigator. I'm a retired school secretary who can tell by a child's backpack whether he has a lunch or a problem. But I understood entries and exits. I understood timelines. The call logs painted 1. A flurry of communication between Vanessa and Christopher in the week before the funeral, a lull, then 20 calls the day my husband died, then a series of texts with smiling faces and numbers. One text from Daniel. We're good? Need the first tranche to cover the cards. My stomach rolled. Another text from Christopher. Deliver the old woman and the deed. Then we're good. I sat at the table and talked to my husband as if he stood at the stove stirring soup. You built a fence, I said. I'm going to carry it into town. I didn't bring the police. Not first. I brought the attorney. Her eyes sharpened when she saw the SIM card. She called someone who called someone else, and soon a quiet man in a sweater arrived with a small machine and hands that didn't touch more than they needed to. He downloaded and duplicated and handed me back 2 copies and the original. Chain of custody, he said. If you end up in court, you'll want this to be boring. I want it to be decisive, I answered. Decisive in court is boring on paper, he said, and I smiled despite myself. He left without a flourish. My attorney leaned forward. You have enough to put a boot on his neck, she said. The question is whether you want to press down in public or in private first. I want to give my son one chance to step back, I said. Only one. Then, set the table, she said. Invite them to dinner. I cooked because cooking makes time into something you can taste. I took out the good dishes for the first time since the funeral. I set 4 places. Ruth asked if I wanted her to sit in her car across the road. I said yes. She nodded, put on her quiet shoes, and kissed my cheek before she left as if I were a girl with a test in the morning. They arrived at 7. Vanessa wore perfume so sharp it bent the air. Daniel looked like he had sat in the car rehearsing apologies and chosen none. Christopher kept his smile in his pocket and brought it out only when necessary. "You cooked," Vanessa said, as if surprised I had hands. "I didn't know what you'd want," I said, "so I made everything we have." We ate the first course with the clatter of people who don't know where to put their eyes. I asked about nothing personal. They answered as if every question were a multiple-choice test, and the right answer was the one that ended the conversation fastest. After the plates were cleared, I brought coffee. The recorder in my brooch was on. The one on the windowsill would capture faces. The one in the rooster would capture voices. If they threw a match, I would show the flame from 3 angles. "We can get right to it," Christopher said, leaning back as if chairs were thrones where he was from. "Your son tells me you're ready to be sensible." "My son is wrong," I said, "but I am ready to be clear." Vanessa lifted her chin. "We want the best for you," she said. "It's time to move forward." I put a folder on the table. I didn't open it yet. "I have 3 questions," I said. 1. Do either of you deny that you've been in contact with Mr. Christopher here about this property? 2. Did either of you enter this house without my permission while I was burying my husband? 3. Is there anything you'd like to tell me before I open this folder? They exchanged glances. Daniel swallowed hard. Vanessa smiled like a nurse about to administer a shot. "We talked about options," she said. "That isn't a crime." "We thought you'd be relieved." "I'm asking for yes or no," I said. Christopher chuckled. "You're not in a courtroom," he said. "No," I answered, "but I am in my kitchen." Daniel stared at his hands. "Yes," he said finally. "We talked to him. We came in. We wanted to make it easier for you." I nodded once. "Thank you," I said, and opened the folder. The deed sat on top, the SIM card copy, the investor's contract, the transfer receipts, the photo of Vanessa in the birdhouse camera's field of view instructing 2 men to carry a box labeled old photos, the transcript of her calling me inventory. I let each page land like a card in a game my husband and I used to play when the power went out. Vanessa didn't reach for anything. She had known documents existed. Christopher raised an eyebrow at the SIM copy. Daniel's eyes filled with tears that made him look, for a moment, 17. "I can go to the police now," I said, even, "or I can give you 24 hours to untangle yourselves from whatever you signed without dragging your mother with you. Here is what untangling looks like. You, Daniel, send an email to Mr. Christopher rescinding any authorization you gave regarding this property. You, Vanessa, send the same. You call the bank and close the lines you opened with my address attached. You meet with my attorney tomorrow at 10 a.m. and hand over any papers you have related to this scheme. You sign statements. You leave this house, both of you, and do not return without my invitation. Then, depending on what you do with those 24 hours, I either take this folder to the district attorney or I take it to a shredder. After making sure every strand of this is cut and cannot regrow, Vanessa's voice went winter cold. You won't shred anything, she said. I might, I answered. For my son. Not for you. She laughed, short and bright. You think he gets to walk away from this because he cried at your table? You think Christopher will let him? That's not how this works. He owes Christopher watched me as if I were a puzzle that required patience. You've played this well, he said, but you've overplayed your hand. You bring this to the police, you think you'll like what comes out? Your name is on some of those lines, sweet lady. Your address is on the cards. Prosecutors like clean stories. I don't see one here. You don't have to, I said. You're not the audience. He smiled for the first time, a real one that acknowledged the game. You're dangerous, he said, almost admiring. I like you. You like tools, I said. I am not one. Daniel stood abruptly, knocking his knee against the table leg. What do you want me to do? He asked, voice raw. Be my son, I said. Choose that. Choose it with the cost attached. He closed his eyes and nodded like a man who sees a cliff and decides to jump anyway. Okay, he said. He pulled out his phone, typed furiously, and then handed it to me. An email to the investor. I rescind any authorization, explicit or implied, for any sale or encumbrance of the property known as. He put my attorney on CC. He sent it, then he called the bank and held while an on-hold voice told him how much they appreciated his call. He closed the lines. He cried silently. He didn't look at Vanessa. She watched him with a face like a cold window. You are not serious, she said. I am, he answered. She turned to Christopher. Do something. Why? He asked pleasantly. Your husband made a choice. Nothing I like more than a man who chooses. She stared at him, and there, finally, was a tremor. She saw it, that her importance to him was as shallow as a puddle. She stood. You'll regret this, she said to me. He will come crawling back to me when you cut him off. And you will cut him off. You live to be disappointed. I live to love him, I said, and I will not stop. That's what will disappoint you. She left a vapor trail of perfume and fury. Christopher stood, but didn't follow. He looked at me, and then at the folder, and then at the house, as if assessing whether the beams were sound. You have 24 hours, he said, echoing me, and smiled as if he'd written the line. You have 0, I answered. Get off my land. He inclined his head and left like a man who has learned not to bang doors. Daniel and I sat in the slow quiet that follows adrenaline. He put his head in his hands. I didn't touch him. Touch would have broken me. You don't have to forgive me, he said. Just tell me what to do next. Meet my attorney at 10, I said. Tell her everything. Then go home, not to Vanessa's, and sleep. Tomorrow we'll talk about the rest. I am not your banker. I am not your enemy. I am your mother. He nodded and left with a face that looked both younger and older than it had when he arrived. This is what could have pushed me to revenge. Is it right? We will find out further. I didn't sleep. I washed every cup in the house. I moved the rooster clock 3 inches to the left and then 3 inches back. At midnight, a car idled at the end of the drive. Ruth called. Do you want me to call the deputy? She asked. No, I said. Let them idle. Let them feel the cold. At 9:50 the next morning, Daniel stood in my attorney's waiting room with his shoulders squared. He went in. I sat in the car with my hands on the steering wheel. At 10:19, my attorney texted, He's telling the truth. He's giving me everything. This will still be messy. Are you ready? I was not. I said yes anyway. By noon, the deputy had visited my kitchen on a civil matter that turned suddenly into something less civil when he called in the serial number from a set of tools found under a tarp in the shed and learned they had been reported stolen from a job 3 towns over. That was the investor's lazy thumbprint. The deputy smiled and asked if I liked living dangerously. I said I had only just started. Vanessa texted Daniel 23 times that day. He answered none. She posted a photo of herself at lunch with a caption about new beginnings, as if hashtags could change the shape of consequences. That evening, my attorney served a notice to Christopher to preserve all communications. He replied with a grin in his voice that could be heard in the typed words, "Happy to cooperate." The district attorney's office called 2 days later. They had received a packet from my attorney with a cover letter that made elder financial exploitation into a phrase that burned. A young prosecutor with an old soul listened to my story without looking at his watch. He asked me to bring the original deed and copies of everything else. He asked if I could live with the attention. I've been told to be quiet for 40 years, I said. Attention feels like someone finally turned up the light. The next weeks unspooled like thread from a spool you think is almost empty, and then discover still has yards to go. Every day, something small shifted. The bank reversed charges on a line of credit I had never opened. The utility company admitted someone had scheduled a shutoff by mistake, a mistake that disappeared when my attorney called from her office with the glass wall. My phone learned to stop recognizing unknown numbers. Ruth brought soup and gossip. The deputy stopped by at odd hours, always managing to look like a neighbor who had found himself with a badge by accident. He asked questions a man asks when he wants to be useful and not in the way. Vanessa moved out of the apartment she shared with my son and back into a friend's condo with a view of the river that she had always wanted me to admire. She posted sunsets with captions about healing. Christopher posted nothing. Men like him don't post. They send people in suits who say words like misunderstanding and amicable resolution. Then they send other people who don't use words. We got the first kind. We were ready for the second. The second arrived as a man with a toolbox and a story about a leak. Ruth filmed his truck, the license plate, and the way he waited a little too long, before ringing the bell. He wasn't a plumber. He was curious. The deputy ran his plate and found a history that made him curious back. The man left quickly and didn't return. I folded that into my ledger. Not fear exactly, but alertness turned up a notch. I slept with a chair under the knob, then laughed at myself and moved it back because the knob would hold. I saw Daniel twice a week, like physical therapy for a limb after a break. We didn't talk about forgiveness. We talked about rent and a new checking account at a different bank, about therapists and groups where men said true things out loud, about looking for a job that didn't involve words like referral and bonus. He looked thinner. He looked like a person. He started wearing a watch again, the one his father had given him when he turned 21, as if time might be something he could keep. The hearing for the restraining order was short and longer than I wanted. Vanessa's lawyer tried to make me look small by calling me dear. The judge frowned and the lawyer remembered my name. The order was granted. Christopher's attorney didn't bother to appear. He wove his webs elsewhere. I didn't plan the final move. It presented itself like a door opening when you lean against it and it gives. The young prosecutor called and asked if I would be willing to sit for a recorded statement about pressures I had faced around the sale. He wanted specifics, dates, words, the shape of silences. I gave them to him. When we finished, he said, "There's one more thing." "What?" "We executed a warrant on Christopher's truck," he said, correcting himself to avoid the name game. "We recovered a device with communications relevant to your case and several others. He's more of a collector than we realized. We'd like to bring charges. We will bring charges. It will be a long road. I can't promise outcomes, but we can promise daylight." "Daylight is a fine start," I said. We set a date for an initial appearance. I ironed a blouse for the first time in months. Ruth offered to sit in the back of the courtroom and glare. The deputy said he'd be in the hall, just because. My attorney polished sentences in the hallway like stones. She told me to breathe and then laughed because I was breathing and she was the one who needed to remember. Christopher walked in wearing a suit that fit like it was sewn onto him. He nodded to no one. He pled not guilty, as men like him do. The prosecutor laid out what he could in that setting. The recorded conversations, the attempted coercion, the unlawful entry, the stolen tools in the shed. The judge listened and set a date for the next thing in a list of next things that legal processes do. It was not a movie. No gavels were slammed. No gasps were heard. But when I stepped into the sun afterward, I felt my husband's hand at my back, steady as it had been the first time we walked into this building to pay the taxes on the country house, younger and worried and not yet aware of the clocks we would need to hide. Justice doesn't move like a bullet train. It moves like water through stone, patient, relentless. And yet there was a moment that felt as decisive as any final scene. It came 2 days later on my porch when Daniel stood with a paper bag containing ginger ale and saltines because he thought my stomach might be off after the court day, because he remembered my body like you remember the map of your hometown. "I met with the investigator," he said. "I told him about the payment plan I had with Christopher. I told him about the night after the funeral when Vanessa said we had to sign the consulting agreement while everyone was distracted because grief makes the world soft. I told him I signed it. He asked why. I told him I was embarrassed. He said that wasn't a reason, but it was a beginning. It is," I said. He looked past me, into the house. "Is it all right if I look around?" he asked. "Yes," I said, and he walked into his childhood like a careful guest. He touched the kitchen table and then the edge of the counter where he had carved his name with a pocket knife when he was 12, and then cried because he had mangled the E and the L. He stood under the rooster clock and tilted his head. "Dad hated that thing," he said. "He hid the deed behind it," I said. He smiled and didn't. "Of course he did," he answered. He stayed an hour. He left the ginger ale and the saltines and hugged me at the door. It was a small hug, not the kind that collapses or clings, but something structured, meant to stand. After he left, I cried for the first time since the night I found the letter. Not loud, not desperate, a quiet letting out. The house held me up, the country house became mine in public the way it had always been mine in private. Papers were filed, lines closed, locks changed back to the keys my hand knew without looking. I planted new birches with a neighbor's son who needed the money and the work. I told him to dig wide, not deep, because roots need space more than depth. He nodded like he knew and probably did. Vanessa didn't apologize. I did not expect her to. She retained a new attorney with sharper shoes who sent letters full of delicate threats. My attorney responded with facts measured in inches. Vanessa started working at a spa where she could sell packages that promised renewal in 90 minutes. She gave interviews to women who like stories with villains who wear pearls. She didn't say my name. That was its own confession. Christopher faced charges in 2 counties. There were other women at other tables with other folders. Some had more, some had less. Together, we had enough. He made bail and moved like a man whose shoes had small stones in them, not enough to stop him, but enough to slow his strut. He would not be stopped all at once. He would be stopped piece by piece the way a sweater comes apart. I sat on the porch one evening with a cup of tea that had gone cold because the sky had gone interesting. Ruth joined me with a jar of strawberry jam and a question she had been holding. "Will you ever forgive them?" she asked. She didn't say who she meant. We both knew. "Forgiveness isn't a pie I have to cut and serve to everyone with a fork," I said. "It's a place I can sit when I'm tired. I will sit there when I'm ready. I will not invite everyone to join me." "Fair," she said. She smeared jam on a cracker and handed it to me. "What will you do with the house now that you won't sell it?" "Use it," I said. "Invite women who need a place to catch their breath. Teach them where to hide a deed and how to listen to their instincts. Tell them to plant birches. You're going to start a revolution," she said. And I laughed because it sounded grand and also true in the small way revolutions can be true. One woman remembers she is not furniture. Another learns not to apologize for her space at the table. That's how dynasties built on audacity topple. I did not invite the realtor back. I did invite the young prosecutor's wife to bring their baby and sit on the porch while we watched the light move across the lake. I learned that infants change shape while you blink. I learned I could hold something small and not be afraid of dropping it. Weeks later, in a supermarket aisle near the cereal, I saw Vanessa. We reached for the same box and stopped. She looked thinner, like a person who has miscounted her allies. She smiled a small smile that didn't announce itself. "You look well," she said. "I am," I answered. She adjusted her scarf and looked at the floor and then at me. "I loved him, you know," she said. "In my way." "In your way," I repeated. "That's the problem." She nodded, to my surprise, as if I had offered a thesis she had been resisting and had finally decided not to argue. She stepped aside. We left the aisle without a scene. I didn't look back. Late that night, the phone rang from a number I recognized with my bones. My son's voice, calm. "Court set a date," he said. "I'll testify. Then I'm going to move to the smaller apartment. I want less to take care of while I figure out how not to be the person who made those choices." "You are the person making these ones," I said. He exhaled a sound that did not have a name when he was a child and had not yet learned that there are words for every kind of pain. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not throwing me away with the rest of it." "I'm a mother," I said. "I reuse what I can." The day I finally went to the birdhouse and took down the camera, I thanked it. It had done its quiet job without praise. I packed it carefully and put it in the drawer with the good napkins. I put the rooster clock back on its tilted nail and let it smile. I didn't need it to hold secrets anymore. It could just be foolish and cheerful and count the minutes until my tea cooled. There was no ribbon on the end of this story. There was no crowd gathered to applaud. There was only the lake and the birches and the creak of the porch swing and the knowledge that when people mistake a woman for a piece of furniture, they will be surprised by the splinters when she starts to move. Justice did not come all at once, but it came like dawn, slowly, and then it was daylight. And the country house watched, as houses do, quiet and loyal, pleased to be what it had always been, not an asset on a page, but a place where a woman could shut the door, sit at the table, and plan the next good thing. Do you think I did the right thing? Let me know in the comments. If you liked my story, subscribe to the channel and like it. Thank you for listening to this story.
My grandma told me this story. I have many more stories. Subscribe so you don't miss the most interesting